If you read Mark's gospel as a narrative, you become acutely aware of its structure. It's neatly divided into two halves. The first half opens with Jesus calling the disciples and caring for the crowds. This, of course, gets the attention of the authorities in Jerusalem, who send emissaries out to deal with him. And from very early on in the story, by the 3rd chapter, in fact, Jesus is a marked man. This first round of activity is followed by a sermon in the form of the parable of the sower. That sermon is framed with the admonition to listen. Jesus says, "Let anyone with ears to hear, listen." This theme of listening is picked up in the Transfiguration as the voice from heaven proclaims Jesus as the beloved begotten Son and says to the disciples, "Listen to him." This is followed by a second round of encounters with the crowds and the authorities. And toward the end of the first half, Jesus will ask his disciples, "Do you not yet understand?" And the first half ends and the second half opens with the story of Jesus healing the blind man, the one whom Jesus had to heal twice in order for him to see clearly. From that point, the second half goes on with Jesus going from Galilee down to Jericho and eventually up to Jerusalem for his last week. And on the way, Jesus teaches the disciples about true discipleship. And 3 times on the way, he tells them what awaits the Son of Man in Jerusalem. That is, rejection, ridicule, arrest, trial, execution, and on the 3rd day, to be raised up. As the disciples hear this repeatedly on the way, they begin to have second thoughts about following Jesus. So that halfway through Jesus' last week in Jerusalem, the disciples will all abandon him and disappear from Mark's story. But on Tuesday evening of that week, after all the attempts by the authorities to trap Jesus so that they could find a pretext to arrest him, Jesus and the disciples leave the Temple Mount for the last time. The last thing Jesus said before leaving the Temple Mount was his comment on the widow who gave her last mite to the temple system. Listen carefully. Far from being the cherished example of giving that the church so often paints her of, she is really the victim of the system. She is the widow whose house has been devoured by the scribes. She is the end result